Okay, so we're looking at this city whose population doubles during the workday. And what we want to do is figure out after 12 hours, right? After 12 hours, what is the population? How many people are in this? Now, recognize that initially this thing started, it actually got to max capacity after 3 hours. So after 3 hours, right? So if it starts at 4 million people, after 3 hours, we would be at 8 million people. But what it's saying now is what would happen if we increase, instead of it stopping after 3 hours, what would happen if we just kept on doubling it every 3 hours? Okay. So let's think about how many times. So a couple things we need to know is how many times are we going to double it? So after 3 hours, it doubles once, right? So after 12 hours, it's going to have doubled 4 times. So I'm going to say it's going to double, the population is going to double 4 different times. Okay? So once every 3 hours. So in other words, so let's take a step back. Now we're going to plug this into our formula. So in our formula, y represents the number of people after however many times we've doubled this population. A represents how many people we start with. It's called the initial population. And x is going to be the number of times we double this population. So let's just start with the 3 hours. Let's make sure everything works out really well here. So in this case, we start out with A as the initial population. So we start out with 4 million people, right? And then it's going to double. So we multiply that by 2. And it's only after 3 hours, it's going to have doubled once, right? So after 3 hours, it's going to double once. In other words, we're going to get out of this, we're going to get 8 million people, just like we were expecting. Now, the question becomes, what happens if it doubled, right? If we did that for 12 hours? In other words, what if it doubled 4 times? So now our formula is going to look like this. So y equals 4 million times our growth rate raised to the 4th power. Okay, so in this case, what do we get? So I get 4 million times 2 raised to the 4th power, or times 16, I guess. Could have done that. And I get a lot of people. So I get y equals 64 million people. Okay. Now, again, I want to emphasize that's not in this case. They're saying what would happen if that growth rate continued, right? They're not. So it's kind of like a what if type situation. Now, that's how many people would be in the. That was how many people would be in the city if it grew at that doubling rate for a total of 12 hours. Okay, which again, it only does that for 3 hours. Now, that's part A of this question. Now, part B of this question says, what would happen so now in part B, we start with 8 million people. Our initial amount is 8 million people, and we're going to decrease, the number of people is going to decrease by half every 3 hours. I think it was every 3 hours, right? Yes. So let's look at this situation. So again, we're going to use the formula y equals a times r raised to the power of x. So in this case, we get y equals a. So now our initial population is 8 million, right? Because that's what they told us. It's starting at 8 million. Our growth rate now, it's not doubling anymore. It's actually decreasing. So our growth rate is 1/2. And again, it's going to go through this process 4 times. Now, in the initial one, let's just check, right? let's just make sure that our thing is good. So after 3 hours, right, normally it only lasts for 3 hours, let's just double check. It should go back down to 4 million, right? If we just did this for 3 mil, if we just did this for 3 hours. And again, we see this is going to be equal to 4 million people. But now let's continue it like we did on the last one. So now, again, here we are continuing it. So we're at 8 million. Our growth rate is 1/2. And again, we're going to continue this growth rate for 4 hours. So now we get 8 million. Is that probably divided by 16, right? So we get, at that point, we would get y equals, looks like, let me double check that. I think that's right, actually. 1, 2, 3, boom. Yeah, it was. That equals, I don't know why I was expecting a different number. So that would be 5 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be 50,000 people. Is that 50,000 or 500,000? Maybe it's 500,000. I can't see. My calculator doesn't give me a comma. So probably makes more sense it'd be 500,000. Let's make sure. Yep, 500,000. So again, I want to emphasize, they are taking the situation and they're extrapolating from it. They're saying, what would happen if we continued this pattern, right? So going back to A, if we doubled it, right, every 3 hours, which we would do for 4 hours, we would get 64, if we doubled it every 3 hours and we did that 4 times, we would get 64 million people. In reverse, if we started with 8 million people and we cut it in half every 3 hours and we did that for 4 hours, we would get 500,000 people.